And good morning. And yes, we're back. And as we promised, on the phone with us this morning is Congressman Jodey Arrington. Good morning, Congressman.
Good morning, Dave, Matt. It's great to be back in West Texas. I'm on my way to Crosbyton, and I'm recovering from a little cold. So I hope your listeners can.
So what's happening in Crosbyton, Texas, for you today?
Well, rural community hospitals are struggling to survive, and if you can't provide basic care to families in rural communities, you're going to have a tough time sustaining the food, fuel, and fiber production that our country depends on. So we're trying to solve that problem for them. We did put an amendment in the Farm Bill to help them, but we've got to look at it sort of holistically, and we probably ultimately have to transform the way we support rural hospitals. So anyway, a lot of dialogue about that. This one in particular, I think, struggling. But half of the hospitals in the country, rural hospitals, half of 2,500 are operating in the red, and that's not good for rural America. It's not good for ag and energy.
Well, and Congressman, to be honest, the other half are probably owned by much larger hospitals. For example, Covenant here in Lubbock owns the hospital there in Levelland.
That's right.
And so they're able to hold on to some of those smaller communities because of the larger hospital in a larger area.
That's true, and that helps some of these small hospitals that are part of that network. But the type of that they have a much worse profile in terms of their payer mix. That is, they have more uninsured and underinsured than the urban areas,
right?
And they have a low patient volume, and it's hard to pay for the fixed cost of providing care through a hospital. So there's some good, efficient ways to make sure we steward taxpayer monies and at the same time have sustainable health care for families in rural communities. We think we have most of what we need in terms of answers, but the best way to get to the solution is to listen, and that's what we're coming out here to do. We're going to do it with a number of other hospitals, but we're going to listen, make sure we got the right game plan going in.
Congressman, I guess the emergency wall fund is the big issue that's going on in Washington. And, I, for one, am concerned about how it may play out in the future. What are your thoughts?
Well, I wouldn't worry too much about the, quote, precedents, because the National Emergency Act 1976 was actually passed by Congress to put greater restriction on the executive branch and have a higher bar by which the president could utilize that authority. And I don't believe the Democrats can use it for gun control and for the Green New Deal, climate change, et cetera. The criteria are very specific, and it's a very narrow path for a president to take. And, people compare it to Obama's DACA and what he did to fund the exchanges on Obamacare. That is a terrible comparison because he made that stuff up out of thin air. This is a National Emergency Act declaration specifically for military construction. We have constructed perimeters around bases in Afghanistan and Iraq. We have burned poppy fields in Afghanistan and drug fields in Colombia. This is squarely statutorily acceptable and constitutionally acceptable for the president to exercise. If he didn't, I believe he'd be derelict in his duty as commander-in-chief to protect the citizens and defend our sovereign borders. It's sad that Congress couldn't figure out a solution. He gave us enough runway to do it. I thought this bill was not only bad from a resource standpoint or under-resourcing the physical barriers, but it actually hamstrings the president. I think he signed something that's going to put him in a much tougher spot going forward to provide comprehensive border security, namely too few beds to detain folks so that you'd have to stay with the catch and release policy. And probably the second worst thing is we got 200 out of 2,700 requested for more boots on the ground, more Border Patrol agents, because we got to have more hands and feet out there to do the job, in addition to physical barriers.
So, Congressman, that brings me to two questions as far as that's concerned. The first one is this appropriations bill that was there. You're talking about hamstring. The one thing that I'm worried about is he's created a state of emergency, but this appropriations bill actually seemed to give the districts the right to say, "I'm sorry, we don't want that here. You can't build it here." Is that going to hurt him as far as that state of emergency?
Matt, you're right, and that was yet another reason why I voted against it, why the president should have. Because while he can get the resources he needs in this declaration of emergency, he now is given this arbitrary veto power to mayors along the border, and that I find unacceptable because we're talking about our nation's borders and national security. Last time I checked, that was something that was squarely given to the federal government and to our commander-in-chief, and I think we've created more loopholes. I mean, we talk about sanctuary cities. This is a security sanctuary city where we've allowed this veto power to exist, and then we've allowed counties to hold out for a year, and we can't wait for a year. We've said it's an emergency.
So is there any way that this could be brought to court as being illegal and out of the purview of these counties? I mean, from a national standpoint?
Yes, as much as the Democrats are hoping that they can stall and stop the president in his efforts to build the physical infrastructure through this military construction component of national security, Republicans are hoping that it's unconstitutional to allow municipality to determine our national security and border security. So I hope that's the case. I voted against it because it was unacceptable on multiple accounts, a few of which we already mentioned.
So when Paul Ryan was there, y'all, the House voted for one that didn't have the wall funding, and then Nancy Pelosi took that. It was a Republican-written bill, I guess, and y'all voted for that. If the Senate would have taken that up, would he have been able to veto that one and then bring up that same bill and go ahead and vote on that? And why wasn't that something he looked at?
He couldn't bring up one from the 115th Congress.
Well, no. Didn't Nancy Pelosi pass one that was essentially the same, a copy of that bill?
Not to my knowledge.
Oh, okay.
The Senate sent us a 1.6. Republican Senate sent us that in December. We in the House rejected it because it wasn't close enough to the 5.7.
Okay.
And now we've got 1.3. 1.3 roughly.
Yeah,
it's but the president could have continued the resolution, but basically he could have said, we're going to continue funding Homeland Security and all these other agencies at last year's numbers, which would have been fine with me.
Right.
Continue to negotiate until we got something acceptable. This was not.
Okay, Congressman, let's take a quick break here. And can you hold through the break and come back after that?
You got it.
All right, thank you, Congressman.
Thank you. And we are back with our final segment of Dave King and Matt Martin in the mornings on KFYO, and we'll return to the phone and talk once again with Congressman Jodey Arrington.
Congressman, McCabe went on, I think it was 60 Minutes yesterday, and talked about how he and I guess Rosenstein had talked about miking up and trying to catch Donald Trump or even get him kicked out with the 25th Amendment. Is this against the law? I mean, is this some kind of conspiracy, or at least, I mean, they keep using this word collusion. It was definitely collusion.
Yeah, look, if people don't believe the deep state is alive and well, they can look no further than McCabe's testimony and his interview. They have abused their power, they being the senior most folks at the FBI. He was acting director at the time, and DOJ. It is as scary as anything I've witnessed, how they have coordinated a coordinated attempt to at best discredit this president, and worse, to give grounds for impeachment by just sort of manufacturing this. Worse than manufacturing, they've been basically spying on private citizens with trumped up charges, no pun intended, that were basically using opposition research from the Democrat Party as a way to get a FISA warrant, which is the warrant you need to basically wiretap private citizens. So it's a sham deal. It's purely politically motivated. There's been no collusion. We've spent millions of dollars, and all we've done is turn over. I guess the best part of it is we've discovered that there's corruption at the highest levels of our law enforcement agencies and our intelligence agencies. I wouldn't say that it's corrupt all the way through, but I would say that we've allowed people in senior levels to use their political motivations to oust a president and to spy on private citizens without having legitimate cause.
So him coming out like that, how did that help the Democrats at all? I mean, it sounds like to me what I've heard of it, it sounds like of course he's coming out making it sound like there's something wrong with Donald Trump, but in the end, I mean, it proves everything that everybody's been screaming, what Donald Trump's been screaming.
I agree with you. I think it discredits the whole sort of collusion accusation and the Mueller investigation. If you notice, whether it's Manafort or someone else, none of these sort of crimes that they have brought to the surface have anything to do with colluding with Russia and nothing to do with the president or his campaign colluding with Russia. So, yeah, to me, this has discredited that process, and hopefully it will be over soon. I think we got the right attorney general. The last one recused himself, and so we just had no check and no accountability on this investigation, and now we do. And I think we needed that guardrail in place. We didn't have it for too long.
This new AG is basically Mueller's boss, isn't that right?
That's right.
And so do you think that he's going to put some pressure on him to close out this investigation and move on?
I think he will. Everybody needs accountability, and even independent investigations need to be managed so that they aren't just dragnets and just free-for-all and just go on infinitum like this has. So I think he'll put the appropriate level of management and accountability. That's what he'll do. He's not going to do anything untoward. We've gone this long. I think people understand in this country that with the resources of the federal government over 10 years deployed to find collusion and have come up empty, I think they understand that this thing was a politically motivated sham.
Yeah.
Congressman, I know that you're in the Ways and Means Committee right now. What is going on there? What exactly are they working on right now?
Well, because Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats are in charge, they've tried to they've had hearings about propping up Obamacare and casting aspersions on Republicans for not supporting pre-existing conditions, which is not true. That's false. And I made every panelist there admit that we, in fact, protected those with pre-existing conditions in our health care reform last Congress. They also went after the president's tax returns, and we defended that as a slippery slope and as beyond the pale. And they have all the information they need through financial disclosure statements to determine if there's a conflict of interest. So it's more politics and theater. The other, I think the one that has was the most legitimate and not political was drug pricing. And we've got to find a way to bring the cost down. It's about half the cost of health care, and health care has been soaring mainly on account of too much government. Their answer is price control, which is a bad answer. It's kind of like Affordable Care Act. It will have the opposite and unintended effect. But there certainly needs to be something done because the incentives are not there for drug manufacturers to bring costs down. We need more competition. We need more transparency as consumers. And so there's a lot of work to be done. I think there's some bipartisan opportunities there.
Congressman, the checks and balances, shouldn't that be over the IRS, not necessarily over a specific tax return? In other words, shouldn't the Congress be looking at the IRS if there's something wrong with anybody's tax return versus looking at that single person?
Well, yes, and here's what many people don't know, and the Democrats just refuse to address, is that the president and vice president are under mandatory IRS audits. So if there was, in fact, something nefarious going on, if there was some conflict, then in addition to the independent counsel investigation, those flags would have been raised, and we'd be talking about them in our oversight role, and we certainly have an oversight role on Ways and Means.
But it should start with the IRS,
happened.
right?
What's that?
It should start with the IRS, not Congress.
Well, absolutely. Listen, the IRS has abused their power, and not much has been done in that regard. In '76, we prohibited the use of tax returns being disclosed to the public because of the Nixon scandals and politicians abusing their power. So,
Congressman, we're up against the clock. It's good to talk to you. I want you to have a great day and look forward to seeing you soon.
God bless, guys. Enjoyed being with you.
All right. Thank you, Congressman.